This is interesting because I think it has shifted over the decades. But Will, what does he represent now in America?
Ask the one white guy. You
go first.
I understand your question is about what he symbolizes to America at large, but it's what he symbolizes to America at large is a host of contradictions. I mean, at the most basic and obvious level, he symbolizes a double murderer, but he has symbolized celebrity in the justice system. He has symbolized, honestly, a sociopath, how the justice system can fail. He has symbolized things in race relationships, and that's the most interesting part. If you can pull back the covers of the most obvious, which is that we see a sociopath, we see a murderer, and you say, who was this guy at various times in his lives when it comes to Black America? With both of you guys, I think that is one of the most interesting aspects to O.J., and it was exposed in Ezra Edelman's wonderful ESPN documentary on O.J., that who he was in the 70s was very different than who he was in the 90s, and honestly very different than who he is today. And I would ask you this, in the 70s, there's a wonderful part of that documentary where it says, you know, he did, and we talked about this morning, he rejected being a part of the civil rights movement in league with Jim Brown and Lou Alcindor at the time, and those guys, and said, no, I'm not Black, I'm O.J., right? And then it has a little clip where it said, little Black kids all across America watched him be the first Black man with national television commercials, Hertz, and in some ways, his selfishness, his O.J. focus ended up being an inspiration for so many. And I wonder sometimes, isn't that interesting of the different ways you can make progress? And sometimes selfishness in and of itself can lead to inspiration. And is that honestly not what we ask sometimes, to view ourselves as individuals, not as groups?
Well, I know for me, being a Black man, and I hate the fact, I'm going to use the word fraud right here, because I hate the fact that we in the Black community at the time, and you know, when the whole case was going down, that we expended political capital to a guy clearly wasn't deserving of it. You know, you touched upon it in the, you know, he grew up in the 60s, you know, 60s and 70s where the civil rights, you know, civil rights was a big issue in our country, but this was a guy that shunned all that. He shunned all that spotlight. It was, again, it was more about him. I don't want anything to do with that. All I care about is O.J. Simpson. But when it was time for him to get, you know, to try to get off, he embraced.
Right.
He embraced the whole notion that, look at me. Yeah, I'm a successful Black man, but look, we had the police department trying to railroad me, because this is coming off the backdrop of the 1992 Los Angeles, LA riots, where there was a lot of tension in that community. So he kind of, what I call pimped that whole, well, I'm a Black man being railroaded. He gets off, but again, he never really wanted any part of the Black community. Every action that he took, you know, took a part, it was all about him, his celebrity, you know, anything that could add value to his situation, not helping the Black community as a whole. So I just feel a sense of fraud from him that the community itself put all of this energy, all of this backing behind a guy that clearly didn't want any parts of it.
I remember in the documentary there was the instance of the art in his home changing, right? As he was trying to, again, get the Black community on his side.
That's the jury as well. That's the genius of Johnny Cochran.
Yeah, it really was. But you know what? You're right. He never truly embraced the Black community. He never really understood that part of it. But, you know, I have always separated O.J. from what his case meant. The O.J. part of this, I have always paid very little attention to. The case is what's interesting to me, because I think what people forget about that time in our country was Black people had a very tough time in our court system back before O.J.'s case. It just seemed like if you were Black in this country and you were accused of a serious crime, if you didn't have money, if you didn't have means, if you didn't have all these things in your favor, if you weren't a star, you weren't going anywhere. Right. You're going to get put under the jail. I think for a lot of us, O.J.'s case, the double murder case, unfair as it may seem to so many people, represented for so many in the Black community, hey, this is the first time we've got a man who is of color, who has means, who has great lawyers, who might actually get free on a case like this, where, and I always make this point, he has to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I talk to people all the time who say, you know what, I think he's guilty. Think is not reasonable doubt.
Right.
This has to be a near certainty. And in this case, his lawyers exploited that, yes, but for many people, he represented that. I don't think O.J. gets it. I don't think he understands it. I think that he has benefited from this system in many different ways. But I think for many black folks out there, there is this sense that he was the first to open up this mindset of, hey, you know what? If we feel disadvantaged by this system, there is a way out. There is a way to have your case and get a fair situation. So the rule of law really is what he means to me in this country. And for his case, his was one of the beginning cases of this idea that you are innocent until proven guilty, that guilt is beyond, in a criminal case, is beyond a reasonable doubt, and those concepts are to be taken seriously.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Ryan. I think no.
But you don't agree.
No.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with what his role was when it comes to the black community and the views towards the institutions, towards the system, towards the deck that's stacked against you. And I would even go a step further and say those aren't gone today.
No, they're not.
That, you said up until the 1990s there's that feeling. That feeling exists today.
He was the first. They're still not gone. You're right.
But as to who he is outside of that trial, the part you said you don't think about quite as much, that's actually the part that I find very, very fascinating. And Damien, you point out what his relationship was with the movement before this trial. And you're right. OJ was focused on OJ. OJ was selfish. OJ was a sociopath underneath it all, but we didn't know that at the time. What was OJ doing? He was looking out for number one, and this is the part that I find fascinating. Yet, in many ways, still had a positive impact. He didn't do the selfless act. He didn't sit out. He didn't join protest. He didn't identify himself as anything but the individual human being OJ. And through that path, actually had a positive impact up until the 1990s by inspiring other kids as to actually what they can accomplish. That's the part I think is fascinating, because we think of only one path forward when it comes to raising human beings up, and that's protest. But accomplishment can do the same thing, and that's the path that OJ was on. He was on the path of accomplishment, and at least according to some, and we saw in the documentary, served as an inspiration.